Welcome dear modeling friends. In this episode we're going to black base the belly of this anteater so that the base coat of RLM65 will be more interesting and serve as a good canvas for the upcoming weathering steps. It is the 10th video on the channel, and with more than 300 subscribers I'm motivated to get the best out of this exotic aircraft. But first we have to fill some seam lines with plastic putty from Vallejo. I thin it down with some tap water until I get a pretty thick wash. You can apply this wash with a small brush and let it flow in the open seam lines. If the wash is too thin, you have to apply it 2 or 3 times until you get a good coverage of the seam line. The Tamiya kit fits absolutely perfectly. The wings just snap to the fuselage and can be glued on almost without a gap. But to avoid any fitting issues, I filled the seam line again with the putty wash. After it dried, I sanded the excess away with a medium flexi file. Then I cleaned the panel lines with a scriber from Trumpeteer, and the toothbrush came in handy to dust off the model. The canopies are nicely molded. You can cut them off of the sprue with a nipper without damaging them. Then you only have to scrape away some little excess with the hobby blade. The masks I used for the canopies are from Edward and are as always perfect quality. To attach the canopies I used the acrylic glue from Amomic. I think it's pretty similar to standard white glue. I applied it to the clear part with a toothpick. Then I put the part on the fuselage and applied some pressure, that the glue filled every gap, as you can see. Okay, almost the whole aircraft is now assembled. I attached the whole canopies with a very small amount of acrylic glue instead of masking the cockpits. I really like the exotic appearance of this aircraft. Now on to priming. These are my 2 airbrushes from Harder and Steenbeck I use. To easily switch between them, I have a quick release valve where you can also fine-tune the airflow. For priming I'll use the Evolution airbrush with a 0.4 needle and a big cup. But first we'll have to do some masking. To mask the wheel wells I use masking putty from PK Pro. It is very easy to handle and you can mask off pretty quickly. Just take a piece and put it in the area you want to mask. Then you can net it into place and adjust it how you like it. After a certain time it sets in following gravity, so it'll blop out if you turn it over. But with some color over its surface the masking putty will hold much better. And yes, I forgot the front wheel wells, which I'll do in an upcoming episode. So subscribe now, don't miss it. Finally on to priming. I use as always Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 in black, thinned with Tamiya lacquer thinner. I mix them in a cup with a ratio about 60% thinner, 40% paint. I just check that the paint is not too thick. Then I spray it with about 15 psi in several layers over the model. As underground for black basing you don't have to use Mr. Surfacer. Any black or very dark color will work, but I prefer Mr. Surfacer because of the semi-matte and even surface it gives. If there is some build-up, rough paint, I sand these spots with very fine sandpaper like 1500. Now on to the first step of black basing after priming the model. I took the base color and lightened it up. For the Do335 I used the RLM65 and the modern grey color. To paint the technique I used my airbrush with the 0.15 needle. To give my random lines some more texture I used the first time some airbrush stencils. These are from Lyon and are made from very flexible cardboard. After mixing a lighter base color, I began to spray many random lines and dots over the panels on the underside of the model. They don't have to be nice and structured. Instead of pre-shading the panel lines, you can concentrate your random lines inside of the panels, creating automatically some darker areas separating the panels. Doing these random lines and dots is very easy and relaxing. You can't do something wrong. In my opinion, it is much faster than pre-shading the panels. Just check that your airbrush tip isn't dried up. You can experiment with thicker or thinner color. After a while your hand will hurt from holding and pulling the airbrush trigger. If you want to check out more black basing action on a Focke-Wulf 190, watch the video I linked on top. There I applied the same technique on a smaller airplane. Now I use the airbrush stencil with the same color over the random lines and dots in several places. But in the end, I didn't see much of a difference. So this time I started the other underside of the wing with the stencil, followed by the same random lines and dots from before. I think next time I will use the airbrush stencil with a much lighter color over the finished random lines and dots. The first time I heard about black basing was on Doug's modeling channel, and I found it a very nice and easy technique for plain colors. Check out the link I'll put above. Since then I used it on almost every aircraft model I built. My next step for future builds will be some more structural distressing with the stencil and other colors on top of these random lines and dots. To accentuate some panels, I masked off the panel line and brushed on some more color on the front, creating some sort of a gradient from the front of the panel to the back. Repeating this step gave some more variation to the overall look of the underside of the aircraft. Okay, now the underside is prepared for the base coat in RLM65. As you can see, if you spray several light layers over this structure, it will live much more than a plain surface in my opinion. And you can do it more easily and faster than pre-shading every panel line, which has to be much more accurate. And don't forget to paint the small parts, or you have to prepare the airbrush again only for this step. If we are finished with these parts, we can start to lay down some thin layers of pure RLM65. As I was struggling with some computer issues, this episode was a little bit delayed, but I try to upload at least once a week, so subscribe and click on the notification bell to keep updated. A big thank you goes out to more than 300 subscribers of this channel. Especially a big shout out to Matt Collette, Barry Whitfield, Captain Morgan, Dana Happy Rotation, Marcus V, The Sprue Fascination Channel, Flying S Models, Wazerio, and everyone else who left some nice and motivating feedback and a like. So see you in the next episode and have a great start into the new week.